It was Thursday, July 24th, 1997. And to all appearances, it was going to be an ordinary high summer day in Lander, Wyoming. But what happened instead was something strange and nightmarish. The kind of nightmare that begins with innocent moments that become harrowing only in hindsight. A casual goodbye kiss, 3 glances at a wristwatch, a cheery wave. It would be the day that 24-year-old Lander resident Amy Wroe Bechtel went for a run among the tall trees of the Shoshone National Forest and vanished. Amy Wroe Bechtel was an Olympic marathon hopeful, amateur photographer, and friend. She was a dutiful employee, a loving daughter, a kind sister, a new wife. Amy and Steve Bechtel had been married for a year and a month. After they graduated from the University of Wyoming in Laramie with degrees in exercise physiology, the couple moved to Lander, population around 7,500, and lived at 9 Lucky Lane, a small white house in a group of 12 utilitarian miners' houses the locals call Climbers Row. They both loved the outdoors. Amy's interest was in running, while Steve excelled in climbing. In 1997, Lander was on the cusp of becoming an elite climbing town, and in that world, Steve was a star. Today, it has evolved into an outdoor enthusiast mecca, hosting the colossal climbers playground of Sinks Canyon in its backyard, the National Outdoor Leadership School, and an emerging road racing and ultra running scene. Now, just as then, cowhands sit on stools next to rock rats at the historic Lander Bar, the prominent watering hole that happens to be owned by a climber. But in 1997, to some, the climbers who now in many ways give the town its identity were aliens, transients who didn't appear to have real jobs. They were fraternal and secretive, almost cultish. Amy was a runner within this climbing clique. She had been a standout distance runner at Wyoming, where she ranked first in school history in the indoor 3,000 meters and second in the indoor 5,000, and with a marathon personal record of 3 hours and 1 minute, had aspirations of qualifying for the 2000 Olympic marathon trials. She and Steve both worked part-time at Wild Iris Mountain Sports, the local outdoor equipment store. And Amy also waited tables at Sweetwater Grill and taught a youth weightlifting class at Wind River Fitness Center. The two had the appearance of happy young newlyweds. They had recently bought a house in the residential heart of Lander and were preparing to take the leap out of their no needs to knock, doors never locked, climbing bum shanty on Lucky Lane. July 24th was to be a typical day for Steve and Amy. When they woke up that morning, they both faced a busy schedule. Steve's plan was to drive with his yellow Lab Jones to DuBois, roughly 75 miles to the north, to meet his friend Sam Leitner and scout some possible new climbing routes at Cartridge Creek. Amy drove her white Toyota Tercel station wagon to the Wind River Fitness Center and taught a half-hour kids class in weight training. After the class, Amy picked up the fitness center's recycling and contacted the phone and electric companies. Later that afternoon, Amy stopped by the Camera Connection, where she spoke to owner John Strum about several photographs she planned to submit in the upcoming Sinks Canyon photo contest. Strum sent Amy to the framing shop upstairs to see about matting. There, she talked with Greg Wagner, owner of Gallery 331, about her photos. He says that in the course of 20 minutes or so, Amy looked at her watch 2 or 3 times before leaving the store at approximately 2:30 p.m. This was the last confirmed sighting of Amy before her disappearance. Around 4:30 p.m., Steve arrived home after his day scouting climbs with Sam Leitner. Amy was not home, but he knew she had a busy day planned. A few hours passed, and Amy had still not returned home for dinner. Steve spoke with Todd Skinner and his wife Amy Whistler next door, but they hadn't seen Amy since midday. Steve turned down an invitation to go for some pizza with the Lucky Lane bunch and waited. He began making phone calls, but nobody had seen Amy. At about 10 p.m., he called her parents to see if perhaps Amy had driven there on the spur of the moment. When they asked him if anything was wrong, Steve, who later said that he was starting to worry at this point, replied with a casual white lie. No. Todd Skinner and Amy Whistler had gone to the 8:45 showing of Con Air, and they arrived home around 11 p.m. to find that Amy still wasn't back. By this time, Steve had called the Fremont County Sheriff's Office with a strange message.
Yeah, hey, I've got a person missing here, I think, and I wondered if you had a spare around any place?
The sheriff's office sent 2 deputies to the house, alerted the night shift, and began to organize a search and rescue team to head out at daybreak. Meanwhile, Skinner and Whistler went to look for Amy's car. They drove downtown, turned right at the Safeway, and followed what's known locally as the Loop Road, a 35-mile affair through the Shoshone National Forest. At around 1 a.m., Skinner and Whistler found Amy's unlocked white Toyota Tercel station wagon pulled off to the side of the road, roughly halfway from Fry Lake, which was to be the end of the 10K hill climb at a place called Burnt Gulch, up in the mountains about 45 minutes from town. There was no sign of Amy. There were puddles below the driver's door and behind the vehicle, but no footprints, no tire tracks in the mud. If she parked there before it had stormed that afternoon, did she get caught in the rain? Where did she go? Inside her car, they found her sunglasses. Her car keys were left on the driver's seat, and a to-do list. A small scratch of paper written in Amy's light, busy hand. One by one, her tasks were checked off the list. She'd already contacted the phone and electric companies to have service turned on at her and her husband's newly purchased home. She dropped off the recyclables from the gym where she worked, at the recycling center, had been to the photo store. But there were other things she hadn't done yet, or at least hadn't checked off the list. At the bottom, run. The fact that there was no body, no real sign of violence even, made Steve the go-to target in the fog of mystery. After all, he was familiar with many of the remote mountain areas in Wyoming. In the first few days after Amy vanished, however, Steve was hardly a suspect. He was helping lead the search. In fact, for the first few days, foul play wasn't even considered by the investigators. No attempt was made to preserve the integrity of what would later be presumed to be a crime scene. According to Fremont County Patrol Sergeant John Zerga, who was assigned Amy's cold case in 2010, the problem with the early investigation was that Amy was viewed simply as a missing runner and remained that way for 3 days. Fremont County sheriffs did not close off any routes or vehicles in the area. All they had were a bunch of people searching the rugged wilderness for a missing runner. Any trace evidence left in Amy's car was lost or ruined when the sheriff's department allowed the Skinners to drive it home. The search began with just Steve and 24 of his friends. But later that day, there were ATVs, dogs, dirt bikes, and over 100 volunteers on the ground. The next day, horses and helicopters joined in. And by the 3rd day, the search area had been expanded to a 30-mile radius. A big wheel of rough country. But it would take a full week after Amy's car was found for the area around it to be declared a crime scene. After the local search fizzled out, Amy's mom, dad, brother, and 2 sisters returned to their respective homes and tried to carry on with lives that would never be the same again. It was Thursday, July 24th, 1997 in Lander, Wyoming. Amy Wroe Bechtel sits down to make her list. The last thing she writes is run. Amy would never check it off. For all intents and purposes, Amy looked like a lot of women who vanished without a trace from the Great Basin region of Nevada, Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming. The question is, what actually happened to Amy? One theory is that maybe she just succumbed to Mother Nature. It's possible that Amy fell during her run, or was attacked by wild animals while in the wilderness. But no evidence of torn clothing, blood, body parts, or bones have ever been found. also possible that maybe she was murdered by her husband, Steve. After a search of the couple's property, detectives discovered Steve's journals, which contained poetry or song lyrics, sometimes with violent overtones, describing violence towards women, and specifically Amy. A week and a half after Amy vanished, Steve employed lawyers and refused to take a polygraph test, which further raised suspicions for many residents of Lander, as well as the media. Detectives interrogated Steve on August 1st, 1997, falsely claiming to have evidence proving he had murdered his wife. A woman driving through the area from where Amy disappeared claimed to have seen a truck matching Steve's in the area, with a blonde-haired woman in the passenger seat, but she was unable to positively identify it was him. On August 5th, an FBI agent, Rick McCullough, accused Steve of murdering Amy. Despite his alibi, questions remained whether Steve had an opportunity during the day to get to Shoshone and to carry out the crime, despite the distance from Du Bois. Amy's brother, Niels, was especially angry at Steve's reluctance to take a polygraph test and cooperate fully with investigators. When her sisters Casey Lee and Jenny Newton appeared on the Geraldo Rivera show on February 3, 1998, the host made a plea for Steve to be more cooperative with authorities. Niels told sheriffs about one night when Amy and Steve were over for dinner. Niels noticed that Amy was bruised. Amy made a joke saying that Steve can get a little rough sometimes. Niels found Amy's reaction odd, saying, "Amy just laughed it off. She wouldn't look me in the eye, and I said, that is not a normal reaction, particularly for Amy." Eventually, Steve had Amy declared legally dead, and in 2004, he married Ellen Sisman, with whom he now has 2 children. Steve Bechtel remained a prime person of interest in Amy's disappearance for many years. In July 2007, the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, Detective Roger Reiser commented on the case to the Billings Gazette. "In my mind, there is only one person that I want to talk to. Only one person who has refused to talk to law enforcement," he said. "And that's her husband." There's at least one more prominent theory as to what happened to Amy. And that is that Amy was murdered by Dale Wayne Eaton, the Great Basin serial killer. A tip came from a man named Richard Eaton, who told the sheriffs that his brother, Dale Wayne Eaton, may have been involved, but investigators ignored the information as they were focused on Steve Bechtel at the time. By not pursuing the lead, they may have allowed the notorious Great Basin serial killer to get away, as on July 30th, 1998, nearly a year after Amy's disappearance, Dale Eaton was finally arrested for another murder. In an area called Patrick Draw, less than a 3-hour drive from Lander, Shannon Bredeen, her husband Scott, and their 5-month-old baby Cody were traveling when their van broke down at a pullout along Interstate 80. Eaton stopped off his off-green 85 Dodge van and offered them assistance and asked Shannon to drive. Eaton then pulled a rifle from the back of the van, kidnapped the family at gunpoint, and directed them south of the highway into the desert. Shannon accelerated and turned in a tight circle instead, which enabled Scott to jump out of the van with the baby and Shannon to get out of the other side. Scott grabbed Eaton and hit him over the head with the rifle butt. After a struggle, Eaton was stabbed with his own knife and left while the family drove away at speed. Richard Eaton knew that Dale had been camping in the Burt Gulch area at the time of Amy Bechtel's disappearance at an average elevation of 7,860 feet, where she was marking her 10K running route, and coincidentally, this was the favorite elk hunting and trout fishing spot of the Eaton brothers. But after Richard called police with his suspicions, the detective dismissed the tip, choosing to believe instead the word of Dale Eaton's niece, who said he was visiting her in Greeley, Colorado on July 24th. A $100,000 reward out for information leading to a resolution of Amy's case meant that investigators were suspicious of Richard's motives. After his 1998 arrest, a plea bargain deal for the attempted kidnapping of the Bredeen family meant Eaton would serve just 99 days in jail. But a sample of his DNA was taken while he was incarcerated. He was allowed to continue work on welding and construction jobs while in a halfway house due to prison overcrowding. On June 16, 1998, he failed to report to work despite strict parole conditions, and a warrant was put out for his arrest. He was allowed to continue work on welding and construction jobs while in a halfway house due to prison overcrowding. On June 16, 1998, he failed to report to work despite strict parole conditions, and a warrant was put out for his arrest. Police finally spotted his van more than a month later near DuBois in the Bridger-Teton National Forest. He was arrested and a shotgun was found in his van, leading to his imprisonment on federal weapons charges. On March 25, 1988, 18-year-old Lisa Marie Kimmel was driving alone from Denver to visit a friend in Billings, Montana, in her black 1988 Honda CRX SI, which had Montana plate with Little Miss on it. She was planning to visit her boyfriend in Cody, but never got there. 8 days later, 2 fishermen found her body in the North Platte River near Casper. Autopsy results showed that she had been raped, bludgeoned, and stabbed. After her family buried her, a strange note signed Stringfellow Hawk was found on Lisa's grave. In July 2002, investigators researching cold cases examined the seminal DNA from Lisa's rape and found a match for Dale Wayne Eaton. Eaton was due to stand trial that fall on a manslaughter charge after killing his cellmate with a lethal punch to the man's vertebral artery. A handwriting analysis from the note left on Kimmel's grave also matched Eaton. Then, following a tip from his neighbors who remember seeing Eaton digging in his yard, Lisa's car was found buried on his property in Monette, just an hour and 45-minute drive east of Lander. He'd been using the car as a septic tank. A portion of the Montana plate, Little Miss, was found nearby. Inside his trailer, authorities also found women's clothing and purses, and newspaper reports about other murdered women. Investigators determined that Eaton had kidnapped Lisa at a remote rest area in Waltman, then held her captive in a converted school bus and repeatedly raped her before murdering her. An FBI profiler who examined the case said that Eaton's behavior all but fitted that of a serial killer. In the subsequent trial, Eaton was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by lethal injection in March 2004. He had a stay of execution in December 2009, with his lawyers arguing that he was mentally unfit to stand trial. In November 2014, a U.S. district judge overturned his death sentence, but he continues to serve a life sentence plus 50 years. In 2010, a detective traveled with an FBI agent to Colorado to try to interview Eaton, but he refused to speak with them, and with the threat of the death penalty no longer hanging over him, investigators have very little leverage. Periodically, cadaver dogs have been brought in to search for Amy. These dogs have been so deaf that they will run straight across wildlife carcasses. They're looking for human carcasses and know the difference. This has happened before when cadaver dogs followed a scent down Burnt Gulch and stopped at a depression. They sifted through every ounce of dirt in the hole and only found a single bread tie. Detectives haven't officially ruled out Steve as a suspect. There are elements in the case that detectives find puzzling. The fact that they had no logs showing that Steve phoned the hospital when he said he did. And then there was a youth camp minister's account of seeing a vehicle that matched the description of Steve's truck being parked on July 24th in the spot where Amy's car was later found. Authorities have been to Lucky Lane with search warrants within the last few years, and have brought along with them cadaver dogs and luminol test kits. The dogs found nothing, and the luminol test came out negative. Detectives have even followed up on a rumor that Steve had buried Amy below the driveway of their would-be new home before the concrete had set. Once again, detectives found nothing there either. July 24th, 1997 was a day that was filled with possibility. The morning sunshine tugged on both Amy and Steve to get them outdoors. Amy sat down to make her list. The last thing she writes is run. Amy would never check it off. Why not? Why didn't Amy come home?